I had never seen anything like it before. The Texas sun was brutal, pressing down on the earth like a heavy hand. The air felt thick with heat, and the dry dust swirled across the barren landscape. But it was the moment that followed that would change everything. Anna Muller, the German woman POW, shuffled along, her eyes focused on the ground beneath her. Her thin, pale hands were shackled in chains, her body weary from days of travel and confinement. She had been told the horrors of America. The propaganda had prepared her for the worst. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the sight before her. The men, the guards, and even the other prisoners looked on with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Among them stood Jake Hawkins, a Texas cowboy, as solid and grounded as the earth beneath him. At first, Anna barely noticed him. She was too lost in the fog of exhaustion and fear. But as she stumbled on the rough path, Jake's sharp eyes caught her fall. The sound of her chains scraping the dusty ground rang through the air, breaking the tense silence. Without hesitation, Jake stepped forward, his boots kicking up small clouds of dirt. He walked straight toward her, his gaze steady but kind, and with a swift movement, he knelt down and unlocked the chains around her ankles. Anna froze. The other soldiers murmured in confusion, unsure of what was happening. Jake didn't care. The chains fell away, the metal clattering against the hard ground. Anna stood, her feet now free, and for the first time since arriving in America, she felt something other than fear. She looked up at Jake, her eyes wide with disbelief. Was this a trick? Was she being set up? But then Jake, with no words spoken, took a deep breath, drank from his canteen, and offered it to her. She hesitated, but only for a moment. The taste of water, cool and real, flooded her senses like a lifeline. It was a simple act, but for Anna, it was everything. As she drank, she began to understand. This wasn't the cruelty she had expected. This wasn't the America she had been warned about. Jake's calm, steady presence broke through the walls she had built around herself. The other soldiers watched, some with raised brows, others with looks of disbelief, but no one dared to stop him. This small act of kindness, in a place that had promised nothing but suffering, was enough to stir something deep inside her. In that moment, Anna realized something she had never considered before. There was more to the world than the hatred and fear that had been drilled into her. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. The days that followed were marked by a quiet, unspoken understanding between Anna and Jake. She was still wary, still unsure of the kindness she had been shown, but every time she saw him, her heart seemed to soften, even if just a little. The air in Texas was relentless, the sun never seeming to set its grip on the land. But inside the camp, a different kind of heat simmered, one that came not from the sun but from the tension in the air. Anna had heard whispers among the other prisoners. Some of them were curious about her interaction with Jake, some suspicious, and a few downright uncomfortable. They had all been raised on the notion that kindness from the enemy was a trap. Anna was no different. But as the days wore on, she began to notice something that unsettled her. Jake didn't look at her with the same coldness the others did. Where the guards saw a prisoner, Jake saw a person who had been broken, yes, but still worthy of dignity. She had never seen that kind of look before. And each time they crossed paths, she saw that same look in his eyes. It wasn't pity, but something deeper, something that made her feel human again. It was almost as if, in that moment, the chains had fallen away not just from her feet, but from her heart as well. One morning, as Anna worked alongside the other prisoners, her hands trembling slightly from the heat, Jake walked by. His boots made a soft sound against the ground, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She met his gaze. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, and she nodded back. It was a silent exchange, but it spoke volumes. Later that afternoon, when the work was done, Jake approached her again, this time with a piece of bread in his hand. It wasn't much, but in this place, it was a gift. I thought. You might be hungry, he said, his voice low, almost gentle. Anna took the bread, and for a moment, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. Her heart fluttered in her chest, but she couldn't explain why. It was just bread, after all. But it was the gesture that mattered. It was the simple act of caring. Anna swallowed the bread in silence. Not because she was hungry, but because it felt like a promise of something more. Something that, for the first time, seemed possible. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Jake had already said everything with his actions. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a person who could still feel, still hope, and still be treated with kindness. As the days turned into weeks, Anna found herself seeking out Jake's company. It wasn't that she had forgotten who she was or where she came from, but something about him made the world seem a little less harsh. He had shown her a side of humanity she had nearly forgotten existed. And it wasn't just Jake. The other prisoners, too, began to treat her differently. They no longer saw her as a symbol of the enemy, but as someone who had suffered just like they had. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. Anna wasn't sure if she was ready to believe in the kindness that surrounded her, but she was beginning to understand something. Not all the world was defined by hate. Some things, some people, could still be kind. And maybe, just maybe, there was room for redemption. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the camp grew quieter, Anna stood by the fence, watching the orange light bathe the landscape in its warm glow. Jake was near, working with the others. She wasn't sure what she was feeling, but her heart ached with something she couldn't name. Perhaps it was the weight of the war finally lifting, or perhaps it was the weight of her own emotions, too long buried under layers of fear. She turned toward him, watching as he finished his work and headed toward the barracks. Her heart beat faster. For the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of something inside her that had been dormant for far too long. Hope. Anna had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but in this moment, standing there in the fading light, she knew one thing. She would never look at Jake Hawkins the same way again. The days had a rhythm now, a routine that Anna could almost predict. The sun would rise, the work would start, and Jake would be there. Sometimes, he would catch her eye across the field, and she would nod, a silent acknowledgement that they both understood. They were not just a soldier and a prisoner anymore. They were two people, sharing the same space, the same hardships. The small kindnesses Jake showed her had begun to mean more than she could explain. There were still moments of doubt, of hesitation, but they were fewer now. Anna began to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't known in a long time. It was in the way the other prisoners spoke to her now, with respect, as if they saw her as someone more than a symbol of the enemy. She no longer felt the sting of their whispers. The fear of rejection had begun to fade. She still missed her family, but something about Jake's quiet presence, his constant care, made the weight of her memories more bearable. One afternoon, after the work was finished, Jake found Anna sitting near the edge of the camp, her back against the fence, staring out over the fields. He walked over slowly, his boots kicking up dust with each step. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over everything. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there for a moment, looking at her. Anna finally turned her head, her gaze meeting his. There was a brief silence before she spoke, her voice soft. "Thank you," she said, the words simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Jake nodded, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to thank me," he replied, his tone gentle. "It's just what's right." Anna smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with something unspoken. She hadn't realized how much she had needed to hear those words until now. They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the distant calls of the other prisoners finishing their work and the rustling of the wind through the trees. Jake broke the silence, his voice steady. "When this is all over, I'll be back home in Texas, working the ranch again. I'll make sure you get a proper meal, the kind you deserve." Anna's heart tightened at his words. He wasn't just being kind. He was offering a future, a glimpse of something beyond this camp, beyond the war. It was the first time in weeks that she had allowed herself to think beyond the present moment. She had spent so much time focused on surviving, on the next meal, the next task, that she had forgotten what it felt like to hope. "I've never tasted anything like the food here," Anna said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "But it's not like home." Jake chuckled softly, a sound that seemed out of place in this camp, a reminder that there was more to the world than just the war. "No," he said, "it's not. But when you're home, you'll have a meal that's better than anything you've had here." His words held a promise, one that she held on to more than she realized. Anna's thoughts began to wander as she sat there beside him. For the first time since the war had begun, she wasn't consumed by the fear of what might happen next. She wasn't worried about escaping or being sent to another camp. She wasn't consumed by the need to survive. She could just be. Just for a moment, she could imagine a world where there was no war, no chains, no fear. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the camp. The heat of the day slowly began to fade, and a cool breeze stirred the air. Anna let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her chest feeling lighter than it had in a long time. "Jake," she said, her voice barely audible. "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" Jake turned his head to look at her, his gaze steady. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But we'll make it through this. And when we do, we'll find a way to move forward. That's all we can do." The simplicity of his answer struck Anna deeply. It was true. There was no way to predict the future, no way to know what would come after the war. But Jake was right. They could move forward. They could rebuild. And for the first time, Anna believed it. She believed that there was a future beyond the war, beyond the camp, beyond the fear. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. The silence between them stretched out, comfortable and warm. The last rays of the sun slipped below the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, Anna felt a sense of peace. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet connection between Anna and Jake only deepened. The weight of the world outside the camp still pressed on them both, but in the small moments they shared, there was a peace that neither of them had expected. As the sun continued to burn over the Texas plains, something changed in Anna. The fear that had once gripped her heart, the constant tension in her body, slowly began to loosen. She still remembered the horrors of war, the chaos of being a prisoner, but now there was space in her mind for something else, something that felt like a distant memory, a possibility she hadn't allowed herself to entertain in a long time. Hope. It came in small moments. The way Jake would toss her a smile across the yard after a long day's work. The brief conversations they would have when the others weren't around, sharing stories about home, about life before the war. Jake's tales about life on his ranch in Texas seemed like another world to Anna. He spoke about the quiet mornings with the cattle, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen, the laughter that echoed through his home. It felt surreal to her, like a dream. Anna hadn't realized how much she had longed for that sense of normalcy until Jake spoke of it so easily. For him, the war was an interruption, a chapter in an otherwise steady life. For Anna, the war had been all-consuming. It had taken everything, her family, her home, her sense of self. And yet, Jake spoke of a world beyond the war, a world that still existed. One day, after finishing their work for the day, Jake walked over to where Anna sat by the edge of the camp, looking out over the fields. The air was thick with the smell of dust and heat, but as the evening drew in, the temperature began to cool, the stillness of the evening settling over them. Jake didn't sit down at first. He just stood there, looking out with her. The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of understanding. Finally, Anna turned to him, her voice softer than usual. "Jake," she began, hesitating for a moment before continuing. Do you think there's still a place for me in the world after all of this?" Jake looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he stepped closer, sitting down beside her. "Anna," he said, his voice calm and steady, "there's always a place for you. You might not see it now, but when the dust settles, when all this is over, there'll be something waiting for you. Something good." Anna swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her that way since before the war. She had spent so long in survival mode, focusing only on the next meal, the next moment, the next day. To think of the future, of a time after all of this, felt almost impossible. But here was Jake, speaking of it like it was just a matter of time. "I don't know if I believe that," she whispered. "I don't know if I can ever go back to who I was." Jake placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch light, but steady. "You don't have to go back to who you were," he said. "You'll be who you're meant to be now. And that's all that matters." Anna didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't sure what it meant, but there was something in his words, something in the way he looked at her, that made her believe. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet wash over her for a moment. When she opened them again, Jake was still sitting next to her, his eyes focused on the horizon. "You'll be all right, Anna," he said softly. "I promise." The days that followed were filled with the same quiet moments, the same small gestures that carried so much weight. Every time Anna saw Jake, she felt the flicker of something inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. The walls she had built around herself were slowly coming down. Jake's words, his actions, they were beginning to change her, to heal the parts of her that she thought were beyond repair. And though the future still seemed uncertain, Anna was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a new beginning. It was a slow process, and the war was far from over, but for the first time, she could see the possibility of something beyond survival. She could see the possibility of living again. The weeks stretched on, and the bond between Anna and Jake only grew stronger. The camp was a place where time seemed to slow down, where the days felt like endless repetition, but in those moments they shared, Anna felt as though she were living in a different world, one that existed just for them. The work was hard, the heat relentless, but there was something about Jake's presence that made it all bearable. She had never expected to find peace in such a place, but peace was exactly what she was starting to feel. It wasn't the kind of peace that erased the pain of her past or the fear of the future, but it was the kind that let her breathe again, to feel human in a way she hadn't in so long. One morning, as the sun was rising over the camp, Jake found Anna sitting near the fence, her legs stretched out before her, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the dusty, dry earth beneath them. Jake approached quietly, not wanting to disturb the quiet moment she seemed to be having. He knew how much these moments meant to her. He had seen the way her shoulders had slowly relaxed, the way she no longer flinched at every sound or movement. She was healing, in her own way, and he couldn't help but feel a quiet pride for her. As he reached her, Anna looked up, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. "Morning," she said, her voice still carrying the remnants of sleep. Jake smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Morning. How's it feel out here?" "It's quiet," she replied, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. "I used to think I hated silence, but now it's nice." Jake nodded, understanding more than she realized. The quiet could be both a burden and a comfort, depending on who you were. "Yeah, sometimes the silence is all we need." There was a pause, a lull in the conversation as they both sat in the stillness of the morning. The camp was slowly waking up around them, but in that moment, it felt as though the world outside their small space had faded away. Anna shifted slightly, her fingers brushing the dirt beneath her. "Jake," she began, her voice hesitant. "Do you ever think about what comes after this? After the war?" He paused, considering the question. The future was something he had tried not to think about too much. It was hard to plan for the future when the present was so uncertain, but he understood the need for hope. "I do," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "I think about going home, to the ranch. I think about the things I'll do when it's all over. But honestly, I try not to get too caught up in it. The future's always been uncertain, even before the war." Anna nodded, her eyes still focused on the horizon. "I never thought about the future much before," she admitted. "I was just trying to survive. But now, I can't help but wonder if there's a place for me in it. If I can ever go back to who I was." Jake looked at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to go back to who you were," he said quietly. "You're not that person anymore. You've changed, just like the world has. But that doesn't mean you can't find a new place, a new purpose." His words were simple, but they held so much weight. Anna wasn't sure if she believed them completely, but hearing him say it made her feel like it was possible. That maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her beyond the walls of the camp. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could look ahead, even if just a little. "I hope so," she said softly. "I hope I can find that place." Jake smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You will," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I know you will." The days that followed felt different. Anna wasn't sure if it was the weight of Jake's words or the slow change within herself, but she began to feel a sense of purpose that she hadn't known in a long time. She still carried the weight of the war, of her past, but she was starting to believe that maybe there was room for her in the world again. And with Jake by her side, even in the silence of the camp, she felt like there was hope for the future. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could change the course of her life. But in that moment, sitting next to Jake on the dusty ground, she realized that sometimes, the smallest gestures were the ones that mattered most. The days in the camp continued to blend together, each one passing in a haze of hard work, quiet conversations, and stolen moments of peace. For Anna, the world outside the camp seemed like a distant memory, something that existed only in fragments. But with Jake's presence, the world inside the camp had begun to take on new meaning. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about what came after. Jake's words still lingered in her mind. You don't have to go back to who you were. She didn't know if she believed him completely, but she couldn't ignore the flicker of hope his words had sparked. Maybe she could build something new. Maybe she could find a place for herself again, a place where she was no longer just a prisoner, a victim of war. As the weeks went by, Anna's interactions with the other prisoners began to change. At first, they had treated her with a mix of wariness and distrust. After all, she had been their enemy. But as time passed, they began to see her differently. She wasn't just the German POW anymore. She was Anna, a person who had suffered like they had, who had lost everything to this war. And slowly, they began to offer her the same respect they gave each other. The barriers between them started to break down. One afternoon, as Anna worked alongside a group of prisoners in the mess hall, one of the women, Elsa, approached her. Elsa had been one of the first to treat Anna with kindness when she arrived at the camp, offering her a smile when most others kept their distance. You're different, Elsa said quietly, her voice low enough that the guards wouldn't overhear. Anna glanced up, meeting Elsa's gaze. Different how? She asked, unsure of what Elsa meant. Elsa smiled faintly. You don't look at us like we're enemies anymore. You look at us like people. Anna didn't know how to respond. She had never thought of it that way. She had been so consumed by her own fear and uncertainty when she first arrived, so focused on surviving, that she hadn't noticed how she had started to see them as more than just prisoners, more than just faces in a crowd. They were people, real people, with their own stories, their own pain, just like her. I didn't know how to see anyone else but myself when I first got here, Anna said softly, her eyes lowering to her hands. But now I see it. I see what we all share. We've all lost so much. Elsa nodded, her expression sympathetic. You're starting to understand, she said. It's not about who we were. It's about who we are now. Anna thought about that for a long time after Elsa had left, her words echoing in her mind. She had spent so much time trapped in the past, in the memories of what she had lost, that she hadn't allowed herself to see what was still left, the people around her, the connections that could still be made. She had spent so much time waiting for the war to end, waiting to go home, that she had forgotten how to live in the moment. But now, sitting there in the mess hall, surrounded by people who had been through their own struggles, Anna realized that she didn't have to wait for everything to be over to start living. She could live now, in the small moments. She could start over, here and now, in this camp. That night, after the day's work was finished and the camp had settled into a quiet rhythm, Anna found herself sitting outside, staring up at the stars. The air was cooler now, the heat of the day giving way to the calm of the evening. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She could feel the weight of the past lifting, just a little. She could feel the hope that Jake had given her, the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in this world again. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like it was possible to imagine something beyond the war. She didn't have to go back to the person she was before the war. She could be someone new, someone who had learned to survive and heal, someone who had learned that even in the darkest of times, there was still room for hope. As the night settled in, Anna felt a sense of calm that she hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her way home. Not to the life she had known, but to a life she could build. And that, she realized, was enough for now. The camp seemed quieter as time passed, the days blending into one another in a slow, predictable rhythm. But for Anna, each day now held something different. It wasn't the harshness of survival that consumed her anymore. It was the quiet moments that she had begun to treasure. Every glance exchanged with Jake, every small act of kindness from the other prisoners, reminded her that there was still humanity left in this broken world. One morning, as the camp started to stir, Jake found Anna sitting by herself near the edge of the field. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the barren land. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt too perfect for a place like this. Jake stood for a moment, watching her, before walking over and sitting down beside her without a word. The silence between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that needed no explanation. After a long while, Anna spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Jake," she said, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Do you ever wonder what it's all for? All of this?" Jake took a deep breath, his hand resting on the dusty ground beside him. "I think about it," he said quietly, "but I don't let myself dwell on it too much. We can't change what's happened. We can only control what we do next." Anna nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. It was something she had heard before, but today it felt different, as if the meaning of those words was just now reaching her. She had spent so much time looking back at what she had lost, so focused on the past, that she had forgotten how to move forward. But sitting here with Jake, surrounded by the quiet of the morning, she began to understand that the future wasn't something that just happened to her. It was something she could shape, piece by piece. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes after," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About who I'll be when this is over. And I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to the way things were. I don't even know if that's possible." Jake turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "You don't have to go back, Anna," he said. "You're not the same person you were before. And you don't have to be. You can be whoever you want to be now. That's the beauty of this. You can start fresh, even after everything that's happened." His words were simple, but they held the weight of something deeper. Anna sat silently, letting the words settle in her mind. She had spent so long focusing on survival, on getting through each day, that she hadn't thought about what came after. She had been so afraid of losing more, of being broken beyond repair, that she had forgotten what it meant to build something new. She was still uncertain, still unsure of where her life would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. "I think I'm starting to believe you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe I don't have to go back. Maybe I can build something new." Jake smiled, the warmth in his eyes giving Anna a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. "You can," he said. "You will." As the day went on, Anna felt a change in herself, a quiet transformation that was slow but steady. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future would bring, but she realized that she didn't need to. For the first time, she was ready to let go of the past, to stop being defined by what she had lost, and to start living for what was still possible. That evening, after the work had been finished and the camp had settled into its usual quiet, Anna sat alone by the fire, her hands wrapped around a small tin cup of warm water. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the war, the loss, the fear. But as she looked up at the stars above, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't the weight of the past that defined her anymore. It was the possibility of the future, the chance to start anew. She had come so far, had survived so much, and now, she realized, she was ready for whatever came next. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a person, with a life to live, a story to tell, and a future to create. And that, she thought, was enough. As the days passed, Anna's world began to shift in subtle ways. The war still loomed large, its shadow hanging over every moment. But there was something new in her life now. Hope, as fragile as it felt, had taken root in her heart. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew it was there, a spark that had begun to grow into something stronger. It wasn't just the thought of going home that had changed, it was her whole perspective. She had begun to understand, slowly, that there could be life after all this. Life that wasn't defined by the war or the suffering. It was a slow process, a quiet transformation. But every day, it felt like she was coming back to herself, piece by piece. Jake's words echoed in her mind. "You're not the same person you were before." She wasn't sure if she fully understood it yet, but she could feel it. She was different now. The past few weeks had been a strange mix of peace and uncertainty. The camp had become quieter, but there was still the tension of knowing the war wasn't over. But it was in the quiet moments that Anna had begun to find herself again. One morning, as the camp woke up to the usual sounds of soldiers and prisoners preparing for the day, Anna found herself standing by the fence again, her gaze drifting over the endless horizon. The sky was overcast, a soft gray that matched the stillness of the land. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for, but the emptiness of the world around her seemed to reflect her thoughts. She had come so far from the terrified woman who had stepped off the transport truck months ago. She had learned to survive, but now, she needed to learn how to live again. It was then that Jake appeared, walking toward her with the same steady gait, the same presence that had been a source of comfort in the chaos of the camp. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, looking out at the world with her. For a long while, they stood in silence, neither of them needing to speak. There was a kind of understanding between them, a shared awareness that they had both been changed by this place. Finally, Jake broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "You look like you're a million miles away," he said, his eyes still on the horizon. Anna gave a small laugh, the sound a little foreign to her own ears. "I guess I'm just thinking," she said, her voice soft. "About what comes next." Jake nodded. "It's hard to think about the future when the present is so uncertain," he said. "But you can't forget that it's there. You can't stop imagining what might come after." Anna looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you really think things will be okay when all this is over?" Jake's gaze softened, and he turned to look at her. "I do," he said simply. "I don't know what it's going to look like, but I believe it'll be better. It has to be." Anna felt a knot in her chest loosen at his words. She had been so afraid of the future, so afraid that there would be no place for her in the world when the war ended. But Jake's certainty, his quiet belief, gave her something to hold on to. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her. A real future. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know when the war would end, but standing there beside Jake, she felt like she could start imagining what that future might look like. They weren't going to go back to the people they were before. That was impossible. But maybe they could build something new. Together. "I want to believe that," Anna said, her voice trembling slightly. "I really do." Jake smiled. A small, reassuring smile that warmed her from the inside. "Then believe it," he said gently. "That's all you need to do." For the first time in a long while, Anna felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was hers. And it was enough. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know what the future held. What mattered was that she had a chance to rebuild, to live, to find a new purpose. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in that. She glanced at Jake, standing beside her, and for the first time, she realized that they had both been through the worst. But they were still here. They were still standing. And that, Anna thought, was a good place to start. As the days wore on, the sense of peace that had started to take root in Anna's heart grew stronger, but there were still moments of uncertainty. The war was far from over, and with each passing day, the reality of their situation remained ever present. But it wasn't the war itself that consumed her thoughts anymore. It was the possibility of the future, the chance to reclaim her life, piece by piece. The camp had changed in small ways, too. The once distant faces of the other prisoners had become more familiar, and with that familiarity came a shared sense of camaraderie. The other prisoners had stopped seeing Anna as just a German POW. They saw her as someone who had been through the same hardships, the same loss, and who, like them, was trying to rebuild a life after the destruction of war. It was in the quiet moments between the tasks, in the soft conversations over the dinner table, that Anna began to understand the true meaning of survival. It wasn't just about getting by. It was about holding on to what made them human, even when everything around them tried to strip that away. One evening, after a long day of work, Anna found herself walking along the edge of the camp, her footsteps soft against the dry earth. The sky was beginning to turn dark, the first stars starting to appear overhead. She didn't know why she had come here, to this quiet spot, but it felt like the right place to be. She stood there for a moment, looking up at the sky, thinking about the future. It was a thought she hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace before. The future. She had always been focused on surviving the present, on making it through each day. But now, for the first time, she could see the possibility of something more. She could imagine a life after the war, a life beyond the confines of the camp. And it was a life she was beginning to believe she could have. As she stood there, lost in thought, Jake appeared beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only existed between two people who understood each other. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low and steady. "You're a long way from where you were when I first saw you, Anna," he said. She glanced at him, surprised by the depth of his words. "I guess I didn't realize how much I've changed," she replied softly. "I've spent so long just surviving. But now I'm starting to see that there's something more." Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's the first step," he said. "Realizing that there's more to life than just surviving. That's what we all need to hold on to. It's what'll get us through this." Anna smiled faintly, the weight of his words sinking in. She hadn't fully realized how much she had been defined by her survival until now. It had been her only focus, surviving the next day, the next moment. But now, she was beginning to understand that there was something beyond survival. There was living. And that, she realized, was what mattered. "I'm starting to believe you," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe there is more." Jake looked at her, his eyes softening. "There always is. You just have to be willing to see it." Anna nodded slowly, taking in the stillness of the night around them. The air was cooler now, the promise of the night settling in. She didn't know what the future held, but standing here with Jake, standing in this moment of quiet understanding, she felt a sense of calm. Maybe she wasn't as lost as she had thought. Maybe she could find her way again, after all. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but in the time she had spent in this camp, surrounded by strangers who had become her family, she had learned to trust again. Trust in others, yes, but also trust in herself. And that was something she hadn't done in a long time. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice full of quiet gratitude. "For everything." Jake didn't respond right away, but she didn't need him to. His presence, the steadiness of his support, was enough. They stood there for a while, side by side, looking up at the stars. The future was still uncertain, the world still uncertain, but for the first time, Anna felt like she could face it. She wasn't alone. And that, she realized, made all the difference. The days passed by, and the sense of change that had begun in Anna's heart only grew stronger. The small steps she had taken in trusting Jake, in trusting herself, were beginning to feel like more than just survival. She was living again, not just enduring. The camp, which had once felt like a prison, was starting to feel more like a temporary home. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was enough. She had started to find purpose in the simplest of things. The way the sun felt on her skin in the mornings, the sound of laughter from the other prisoners as they shared stories over meals, the way the night sky stretched above her, full of stars that seemed to promise something better. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anna found herself sitting outside again, near the same spot where she and Jake had stood not long ago. The air was cooler now, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the sky above. She had been thinking a lot about what Jake had said to her, about the possibility of starting fresh, of creating a new future. It had seemed like a distant dream at first, but now it didn't feel so impossible. As she sat there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned and saw Jake walking toward her, his familiar figure casting a long shadow in the fading light. Without saying a word, he sat down beside her, his presence as steady as ever. They didn't need to speak right away. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. It wasn't the heavy silence that used to hang in the air when she first arrived in the camp. It was a quiet, peaceful kind of silence, the kind that only existed between people who understood each other. After a few moments, Anna spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Jake, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About starting fresh." Jake turned to her, his eyes steady. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm. "What are you thinking?" Anna hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think I can do it. I think I can start over. I think I can build a life after all this." Jake smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling slightly. "I knew you could." Anna felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She wasn't sure how it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing herself as just a prisoner, just a victim of the war. She had started to see herself as more than that. She was a person with the ability to shape her own future, to build something new from the pieces of her past. It wasn't going to be easy. She still carried the scars of the war, the memories of what she had lost. But she realized now that she didn't need to let those things define her. "I'm not sure what the future holds," she said, her voice a little quieter now. "But I know I want to live it. I want to be more than just surviving." Jake's gaze softened, and he reached over, resting his hand on hers. "You're already more than just surviving, Anna," he said. "You've got a strength in you that's hard to come by. I'm proud of you." The words were simple, but they meant more than she could say. She had never thought of herself as strong. In the past, she had always seen herself as someone who just kept going, someone who pushed through the pain because she had no other choice. But now, sitting beside Jake, she realized that there was strength in moving forward, in choosing to live again, even after everything that had happened. The silence returned, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that filled the space between them with understanding. Anna leaned back against the dirt, her eyes gazing up at the stars. She wasn't sure where the future would take her, but for the first time, she felt like she could face it. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Jake, and she had herself. And that, she realized, was all she needed. Slowly, as the night grew darker, they sat together in the quiet, each of them lost in their thoughts, but both of them feeling, for the first time in a long time, like there was something to look forward to. The war was still raging, and the future was still uncertain, but Anna had learned something important in the months she had spent in the camp. She had learned that survival wasn't the same as living, and that it was possible to find hope, even in the darkest of times. And maybe, just maybe, that hope was enough to carry her through whatever came next. As the days drifted by, the shift in Anna's spirit became more and more apparent to those around her. She had changed in ways that she couldn't fully explain, and it wasn't just the visible changes. Her posture was different now, her gaze stronger, but it was the subtle shifts within herself that mattered most. The past seemed like a weight she had carried for so long, but now, it was like that weight had lightened, just a little. She no longer felt like a ghost of the person she once was, drifting through the motions of survival. There was something new now, a sense of purpose, even amidst the uncertainty of the present. It wasn't about the future being clear or guaranteed. It was about finding peace in the small moments and allowing herself to believe that something better was possible. She had learned to forgive herself, to stop blaming herself for things she couldn't control. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the past crept up on her, but she knew now that she was more than the sum of her past. She had a future waiting to be written. One evening, after finishing their work for the day, Anna found herself sitting with Jake by the edge of the camp once again. It had become their quiet ritual, a moment when the world seemed to fade, and they could just be. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, and for the first time in weeks, Anna felt like she could take a deep breath without the weight of fear in her chest. Jake didn't speak right away. He just sat beside her, and for a moment, they watched the sky together, letting the world turn in silence. It was as if the silence between them had become a language all its own. Then, finally, Jake turned to her, his voice low and thoughtful. "You're different, Anna," he said, his gaze steady on her. She glanced at him, surprised by the words. "I feel different," she replied softly. "I didn't think I could feel this way again, you know? I didn't think I could find peace after everything." Jake nodded slowly. "You've been through a lot, but you're still here, and that means something. You found a way to live again." Anna smiled faintly, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. She had found a way to live again, hadn't she? She had been so focused on surviving, on pushing through the pain, that she hadn't realized how much she had been holding herself back from truly living. But now she could see it. The future wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was real, and she was a part of it. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next," she said, her voice quieter now. "I know I can't go back to who I was, but maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need to go back. Maybe I can just start from here." Jake looked at her, his eyes full of something Anna couldn't quite place. "You don't have to go back to anything," he said gently. "You can start wherever you are. The past doesn't define you anymore. You define you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She hadn't realized how much of her identity she had tied to her past, to the things that had happened to her. She had thought that the war and the loss would always be a part of her, that they would shape who she was forever. But Jake was right. She didn't have to be defined by the things that had happened to her. She was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. And that was what mattered now. She was still her. Anna sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. The world around them was still, the air cooling as the evening deepened, but within her, something had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And in that living, there was room for hope. She didn't have all the answers, didn't know where she was headed, but she could see the path ahead of her, clear and full of possibilities. And that was more than she had ever hoped for. The silence between them stretched again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was filled with understanding, with the quiet realization that they both had come so far from where they had started. They had both been broken in different ways, but now they were healing, in their own ways, side by side. It wasn't the life they had imagined, but it was their life. And that, Anna thought, was enough for now. The stars above them were brighter now, the night air cooler, and as Anna looked up at the sky, she felt a sense of peace settle in her chest, a peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't alone. She had Jake, and she had herself. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like everything she needed. As the weeks passed, a subtle but undeniable shift continued to settle within Anna. The days, though still long and marked by the rhythm of camp life, now seemed to hold a different kind of weight. Each moment, each breath, felt a little lighter. She had stopped living only for survival and had begun to truly live. It wasn't without its struggles, but there was a quiet strength in her now, one she hadn't known was there before. She wasn't just surviving the war anymore. She was learning to thrive despite it. Her interactions with the other prisoners had continued to deepen as well. The walls that once separated her from them had come down, and she now felt like she was a part of something bigger, something more significant. She had learned to trust again, not just in herself, but in the people around her. The bonds formed in the camp, born from shared hardship, had become something beautiful, something real. One day, as Anna worked in the garden area with the other prisoners, her hands moving slowly but purposefully through the soil, she noticed Jake. Standing by the fence, watching her. He had always been there, a steady presence in her life. But today, there was something different about the way he looked at her. There was a warmth in his eyes, a quiet admiration that spoke more than words ever could. She paused for a moment, meeting his gaze, and smiled. Jake returned the smile, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, soft and genuine. "You're doing good work," he said, his voice carrying the approval that she had come to cherish. "I never would have thought that a garden could bring so much peace, but it does. It's like I'm planting something new, not just food, but something that feels like hope." Anna wiped the dirt from her hands as she stood up, her smile still lingering. "It's funny, isn't it?" she said softly. "How something so simple, like a garden, can give you the strength to keep going. It's like every little bit of growth, no matter how small, reminds you that you can grow too." Jake nodded thoughtfully, taking a step closer to her. "You've grown, Anna. I've seen it. I know you've had your doubts, but look at you now. You're not the same person who came into this camp. You found a way to be more than just the pain of your past. You found a way to live again." Anna looked down at the small plants she had been tending to, feeling the truth of his words settle inside her. She had found a way to live again. She had stopped letting the past define her, stopped letting it control who she was. She had realized that the past didn't have to dictate her future, that even after all she had lost, she could still find a way forward. "It's strange," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "how something like this can change you. When I first came here, I thought I would never be the same. I thought I'd be broken forever." Jake stepped closer, his presence offering the kind of quiet comfort that only he could. "You're not broken, Anna. You were never broken. You just needed time. Time to heal. Time to find yourself again. And now, here you are, a different person, not less, but more. You found something in you that you didn't know was there." Anna smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. It was hard to believe, but Jake's words felt true. She had found something in herself that she hadn't known existed. It was a quiet strength, a resilience that she hadn't been able to see when the weight of the war had been too much to bear. "I don't know what's next," she said, her voice steady but full of possibility. "But I know I'm ready for it. I don't know where I'll go, but I know I'll keep moving forward." Jake's eyes softened as he looked at her, a sense of pride in his gaze. "And that's all you need to do. Keep moving forward. Because no matter where you go, I know you'll be all right. You're stronger than you think." Anna looked up at the sky, the last remnants of daylight fading into the deepening twilight. The stars were beginning to appear, distant and calm, reminding her that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. She didn't know where her journey would take her. She didn't know when the war would end, or what kind of life she would build once it was over. But in this moment, sitting here with Jake, surrounded by the quiet hum of the camp, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know everything. What mattered was that she was no longer just surviving. She was living. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep, unwavering sense of peace. She was ready for whatever came next. As time passed, Anna's world began to feel smaller in the best way possible. She had found a rhythm in the camp, a routine that brought with it a sense of normalcy she hadn't thought possible. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what she had once imagined her life would be, but it was hers. She had learned to find meaning in the small moments, the everyday occurrences that once might have seemed insignificant. The sun rising each morning, the laughter of her fellow prisoners, the steady rhythm of work. Each of these things was a reminder that life, even in the most unlikely places, could still be lived. Anna found herself waking up each day with a sense of anticipation. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about truly being present in her own life. The thought of the future still lingered at the back of her mind, but she no longer feared it. She didn't know what would come after the war, after the camp, but she had stopped worrying about it. Instead, she focused on the now. One afternoon, as she sat with Jake under the shade of a tree, the warm breeze carrying the scent of the earth, Anna realized just how far she had come. She had been afraid, so afraid of losing everything, that she had forgotten how to embrace the moments she still had. But now, with Jake beside her and the quiet comfort of the camp around her, she could see it clearly. She was living again. The simple fact that she was still here, still able to laugh, still able to feel, was a victory. "I never thought I would get here," Anna said, her voice thoughtful. "I never thought I could feel this way again." Jake looked at her, his expression warm, the sun casting soft shadows across his face. "You've come a long way, Anna," he said quietly. "And you've done it yourself. You've learned to live again, and that's something you should be proud of." Anna smiled softly, the weight of his words settling over her like a warm blanket. She had never thought of herself as strong, but in this moment, she realized how far she had truly come. She had survived so much, and though the scars remained, they no longer defined her. She was more than what had happened to her. She was a person who had found a way to move forward, to keep living, no matter what. "I'm not sure what comes next," Anna admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "But I know I'm ready for it." Jake gave her a small, reassuring smile. "That's all anyone can do. Be ready for what comes next. And know that no matter what, you're not alone." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Anna realized then, in the calm of that moment, that she had never truly been alone. She had people around her, even in the most unexpected places, who cared, who had shared in her journey. And as long as she had that, she knew she could face whatever came next. The evening settled into a quiet stillness, the camp fading into a peaceful hum as the stars began to emerge overhead. Anna felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known in a long time, a sense of peace that came from knowing that, despite everything, she had found her place again. She had found her way back to herself. It wasn't the end of the journey. It wasn't a neatly tied-up conclusion. There was still much to be faced, still much uncertainty in the future. But in that moment, under the vast Texas sky, Anna knew that she had the strength to face whatever came. The war would eventually end, the camp would eventually close, and the world would move on. But for now, she was here, and that was enough.